In 2019, declining sales and unprofitable restaurants depleted the cash reserves of NPC International, the operator of iconic brands Pizza Hut and Wendy's, leaving them with no defense against COVID-19. The company and its advisory team of Weil Greenhill and AlixPartners used a toggle structure RSA to execute a complex sales process while keeping its restructuring options open. This allowed the team to design, negotiate, and execute the largest quick-service restaurant franchise sale in history through 6 simultaneous 363 transactions while closing 300 locations in a fully consensual plan and projecting a 90% first lien recovery and nearly 100% employee placement.
Good day, everyone. Today I'm here with Charlie Braley and Jim McGlynn from AlixPartners, and we are discussing their winning submission for the Transaction of the Year Award for the Chicago Midwest Turnaround Management Association chapter. Very excited to be here. Charlie, thank you for making the time, and Jim, thank you for joining us online. I'm really looking forward to hearing what made this deal work and what were the pivot points that were really key in this. But from where I sit, this was a really impressive deal. You are talking Pizza Hut and Wendy's, really iconic large brands that were involved in this restructuring, if you like. 1,600 stores, 300 stores that had to be closed. We'll talk about that. 30 states, 30,000 employees, full-time and a lot of part-time employees. What stood out for you that made this such a complex deal?
I would say the biggest thing that stood out to me was the fact that you had a restructuring that you were trying to manage between creditors and debtors, but then you had the added implication of having the brands, the franchisors at the table as well, who had a potentially a lot of say over the outcome of what ultimately would be the resolution to a restructuring here. So having them at the table was just an added complexity that I hadn't personally encountered before.
How many different entities were they?
Well, so there was the first lien bondholders were the primary debt holders. There was a second lien tranche of like 160 million, I believe. Then there was an unsecured creditors committee. So there were 3 committees there. There were 2 brands, Yum Brands or Pizza Hut, and then the Wendy's brand that due to their franchise or franchisee agreements, they had consent rights potentially over what they would be willing to consent to in a transaction if we were to sell or to reorganize. They were very involved throughout the process.
Okay. Jim, from your side, anything that stood out to you about the complexity of this deal?
No, I think Charlie covered it. I think the different constituencies and trying to get everybody together was something that took a long time.
Right.
There's a lot of competing interests in what people wanted as an outcome, and spending a lot of time with each and understanding was key to getting this done.
Okay, I get it. So could you explain as much as you can, how was your firm retained? That's number one. And then number 2, how was the rest of the team formed? You were joined by Weil and Greenhill together with AlixPartners as the main entities here.
Yeah, I believe the order of retention was some combination of Weil and Greenhill had been retained. Mm-hmm. They were working with the equity sponsor to explore strategic alternatives. At the same time, the company was having a liquidity crisis.
This was in 2019 already?
This is in 2019. And so this is pre-COVID, and the liquidity crisis really required a financial advisor to come help them. They had 30,000 plus employees. They needed some support in understanding what was their liquidity runway and what kind of timeline would they have to explore alternatives. So ultimately we met with the company. The company decided to engage us and we were brought on. But Weil and Greenhill were there and already kind of working with the company about sale, refinance, other strategic alternatives.
Okay. And did you have to win a parade with someone else for this advisory role?
Yeah, I believe they talked to other parties, but we were fortunate to be selected, and we had a really good relationship with the management team and the sponsor right off the bat.
That counts a lot. No,
yeah.
Thank you. So then, pre-petition, we now still before COVID, there was a need for 35 million to be raised from existing secured lenders, I believe, and just as an emergency loan. Can you explain how that happened? How much stress was there before COVID? and how did that buy you time as COVID hit? What was the dynamic during that period?
So Jim, I'll give a little bit of an overview, and then maybe you can bring up some of the details on how stressful it became. But ultimately, prior to COVID, the company had two business operations. One was a 1,200 store business that was the Pizza Hut business. The other was a 400 unit stores of the Wendy's business. The Wendy's business was operating well. The Pizza Hut business, however, had been under a lot of stress because of other new entrants into the market, competition from Papa John's, from Domino's, and from other, regional competitors, not to mention a brand that was just kind of a little bit, hadn't really been reinvigorated. And they were working to try and change things. But in the meantime, what was happening is sales and performance of those stores was declining.
Okay.
And that was putting a huge liquidity strain on the company.
Okay.
And so by the time we got there, they had only a few weeks of liquidity. And ultimately, we had to work quickly to try and figure out how we could extend that liquidity and or size some sort of funding that would get us through. But Jim, it got pretty hairy at certain points, as you can attest to.
Yeah, and it did, and we had some severe vendor contraction issues as well. When we got in, vendors started really pulling on the company, so we had a lot of negotiations with them, but that also sucked out liquidity, which shortened the time frame of what we thought was the runway to get some new money in, and so it became a real hairy situation of making payments within hours of getting that money in.
Okay. So this 35 million, you had to guess how much to bring in based on how much stress COVID added to the existing stress. How did you come up with that number?
Yeah, this was actually pre-COVID, so I believe, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was in February of 20 that we got the 35 million.
Yep.
So this was right before COVID.
I see.
And there was some seasonality in the business, so we had a projection that that tried to help us size what the need would be through the trough. The 35 million was kind of what we believed would be needed to get through to a period where we could stabilize the business and hopefully, nobody knew COVID was coming at this point in time, so hopefully stabilize the business and develop a solution that could be executed quickly. And I know, a lot of folks in our line of work have come close to not making payroll before. That's obviously, those are scary times. I've never had a situation where there were 35,000 employees that were potentially not going to make payroll.
Okay.
And to Jim's point, we had to start doing our cash flow forecast on an hourly basis, knowing when deposits would be recorded by the banks and things like that. It was very stressful, biting your fingernails type of moment. But thankfully, everything worked out. We did get the $35 million the same day that we actually had payroll due. So we were just in the nick of time with that money. And a credit to our ad hoc bondholder group, who had some concentrated holders there that were supportive of the company, were able to get up to speed quickly, and were interested in helping the company, see a successful restructuring.
Okay. So the next phase of the deal, if you like, is really to do some advisory work, maybe try for an out-of-court solution, but then at some point you realize it's not going to happen and you start preparing for the July filing that you eventually did in 2020. So how did that period work out, and what were important pivot points during that period?
Jim, help me out here as well, but I think one of the critical components was at that point in time, we weren't really contemplating the sale of the business. We were contemplating how can we get an equity or our bondholders, if there was enough willingness on our bondholders to convert to equity holders, and if we could get consents from the two brands to allow them to be equity holders within their franchisee network, that we might have a path forward there. And then also how to rehabilitate the performance of our Pizza Hut business, because at that point in time, we were projecting year-over-year decline, and we knew that we needed to close some underperforming stores in order to concentrate to a group of stores that would perform, and it would be something that had a going concern opportunity going forward.
Did you try to get that agreed to pre-petition or as part of the RSA, because the restructuring support agreement was starting to be formed at that point?
I think we were in early stage discussions at that point, Jim. Jim, jump in here, but we had started early stage discussions with them prior to COVID. And COVID, I mean, I can almost think of it to the day. It was like March 15th or something when the world changed. But in the lead up to that, the January and February conversations, it was very early stage, if I recall.
Yeah, it was, and we were working from the time we got in late 19 all the way through the July filing of trying to get an out-of-court deal done.
Okay.
The real situation was, as Charlie mentioned, the performance of Pizza Hut. And there was no real good way to say there's a path forward without these store closures.
Yeah.
There's another aspect to that. If you didn't close these stores, there was requirements to do expensive remodels and to put a lot of cash in. And the company just simply didn't have it, and they would not be able to honor the franchise agreements as well.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the complex negotiation with the franchisors as well, of trying to get these stores closed. And on top of that, we don't have the money to fix them up if you make us keep them open.
Yeah, I read something about the dine-in stores were really the ones that were dragging it down because they were out of favor, and the drive-through ones were the more modern stores.
Yeah, I think that's generally true. The pizza industry as a whole is delivery.
Okay.
And so they're newer concept stores, and they're smaller inline in a shopping center stores were doing okay. They were generating some cash. They had a pretty big portfolio of what they call the red roofs, which are the old big Pizza Hut buildings that you would see around. And those were the ones that were dragging down overall performance.
I see.
And they were going to require a lot of liquidity to try to maintain.
I see. Thank you.
And just a one side note there as well, the conundrum the company had was that those were high labor, high loss stores because they had served buffet style restaurant in-house, in-room dining. So they were not well performing stores. They were also tired from a concept standpoint. The problem was that there were these major investment requirements that they had, but the stores were performing, and year over year they were continuing a decline that you just couldn't substantiate, make an ROI, reasonable ROI on the investment. The investment wasn't worthwhile. So it was really, things until the brand saw a turn, you couldn't justify making an investment to remodel those stores. So they were trying to do situations where rather than remodel, they would move that store and try and develop a shopping mall, what they called a restaurant-based delivery restaurant that was lower cost, lower footprint, didn't have in-house dining, and they were kind of trying to do conversions. But it was a complicated situation for sure, because the overall brand performance prohibited a real solid investment into the stores that they had.
Okay. Well, what was really interesting in this deal was the toggle structure RSA, restructuring support agreement, that you came up with. Why was that needed for our members that may not know? Why can you not just go with a plan that contemplates flipping from a sale strategy to a standalone reorganization? Why is it important to really have a toggle structure built in?
I think a toggle structure makes sense in a lot of situations, and just to give alternatives to the creditors, give some optionality to what might maximize value. In this situation, we did have a bondholder group that was interested in becoming part of the franchise network with both of those brands, and so we were interested in reorganizing the company. We were 20% of the Pizza Hut brand in the U.S. So we felt like NPC really had a really substantial position in helping the brand turn around. So if we could turn around, the brand could turn around, it would lift all boats, if you will.
Yeah.
That said, we still had two relatively large corporate organizations, Wendy's and Pizza Hut, with the Yum with the Yum banner over them, that were very cautious about new entrants into their franchisee network. And so, I think it was in part in try and gain their support, let them know that we were being helpful. We weren't trying to come to some sort of conflict over whether or not they could, approve or disapprove of an outcome. So we did the dual paths. We thought that was the best way to seek a path that would gain their consents and also test the market.
Okay. Can you remember what percentage of support you got for the RSA before you filed?
I believe it was like 82%, Jim, but that's a percent.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I don't remember. It was pretty high.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Just one thing to add on the toggle. It was actually a really complex toggle as well, because the sale side of it could be sold business as a whole. It could be split Wendy's and Pizza Hut, or it actually could be split even by brands down into regional sales. So there was a lot of different options that we could pursue to try and maximize the value in the transaction.
And it must have been very hard to calculate the alternatives to put it in front of them in COVID with sales moving up and down and laws and regulations moving up and down.
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge to keep track of all the different options that we always had to think about when looking at things. And one of the interesting things is COVID hit in March, and the pizza sales actually started picking up. As we all know, people started staying home, getting pizza delivered, and the side of the business that was struggling actually started, turning around a little bit.
Interesting.
Just one other point on that. It's a credit to working together with Weil and Greenhill, because Greenhill, to their credit, had to go out and solicit large-scale potential interested parties that could come in and buy businesses as a whole. They also went out with a marketing program for regional buyers that might be able to purchase it, and then in some cases, down to limited small regions where you were looking for very small, unsophisticated buyers. So it was really a team effort between all the advisors to take it to market and respond to diligence inquiries that were ranged from what does this store do to how does this market perform to how does this business perform and what does it look like as a standalone or a part of a strategic. So.
Right. Interesting. Well, then you filed in July, and now it's execution time. You start getting approval for a plan to close these 300 Pizza Hut stores. Mm-hmm. No Wendy stores were closed, right?
Nope, no Wendy stores were closed. I don't think there were any that weren't already scheduled for closure that closed, Jim.
There were a couple closures, but it was on one-off basis that were already undergoing some other changes.
Yeah.
Okay, so how active were you in the project plan and the execution of those closures and to make that work efficiently? How did that work?
We were extremely. This is probably one of the major breakthroughs of the case. Credit to our senior MD Eric Koza, who had the major talking points with the Pizza Hut general counsel to try and help give them evidence. We had to develop a plan that evidence for them that these stores were in everybody's best interest to close. Okay, these are regions where the brand might be able to grow back into, but for the time being, there was other sufficient footprint capacity that could fill in, that they wouldn't, have a massive loss of sales at the brand level, and that it was in everybody's best interest to, exit these stores. And to gain their consent, we also pursued various legal aspects where we were, wanted to be able to act within our rights to close these stores given their level of underperformance that they had, and we were acting in goodwill. So it was a combined legal and business approach to them. Once we gained their consent to close that, we had to do that very quickly. So what we had was a plan to take the employees of those stores and for I think over 90% of them, we're able to offer them continued employment in a local store. So we weren't, having a massive layoff. That was really important to the business and to maintain morale, and particularly in a marketplace where we were seeing, that business continue to improve. Yeah. And then in addition to that, you had to do it very abruptly. So we had requirements that were imposed by the brand, by Pizza Hut, to say we had to close these stores in 90 days. That means you have to take down signage, you have to close, basically de-identify is what we called it, de-identify the store, which is a massive, you think about it back in that stage, I mean, there's contractors and people who have to go out into these stores. They have to take down stuff. This is a massive outlay of human capital. Yeah. And to be able to deploy that as quickly as it did, we relied heavily on a combination of our specialty restaurant and hospitality group and the company's real estate and property management team came together to deploy that, and we closed all those on time, which was, I thought, was a major win, Jim. But
yeah, it was quite a sprint, and as Charlie alluded to, this was during COVID where people weren't working, people weren't going out. Yeah. There was not availability of contractors, and if you think of the geography of the company, it's spread all the way across the United States. We had to coordinate across all these different states to try and get this done.
Right.
Quite a feat.
Okay, so now that added a lot of value to sell the company. Now you've made much more sellable. So what other items did you address to maximize value in the sale?
Yeah, so as part of the pre-petition work and leading into the bankruptcy, we had gone through a number of initiatives to try and preserve liquidity, try to improve operations, to try to make the company, either sellable or more valuable on the other side. COVID hit, actually helped the Pizza Hut side of the business. So we helped, look at how you keep your delivery business going, the challenges of keeping people in the stores to operate during that time, the requirements to have masks and shields we had to go through to make sure that the stores were operating. That showed a great improvement in what the stores could actually do. So I think that plan kept in the bankruptcy, and the company just actually became more valuable as we went through the process.
Right. No, good.
And it really showed the capacity of the stores and the employee base that we had in place. We were able to maintain a lot of our employee base, which is remarkable because a lot of people didn't want to go into work, didn't want to, surprisingly, and this is a credit to the management team and, everywhere from the store level up to the senior level, there was a constant communication cadence that was going on to keep employees motivated. And we were trying to make sure that we had an employee base that would continue to show. There's massive turnover in that industry, as you might expect. But what it showed as we saw sales increase during the COVID period, it showed the capacity of those stores, the profitability that could be generated with it, with an intact workforce, that those stores could really generate a nice profitable return for folks. And there was upside as the brand was rebounding as well. So there was future gains. In addition, on the Wendy's side was more impacted by COVID than the pizza business because the delivery pizza was doing really well. Whereas on the other side, the fast food businesses were impacted because you no longer had in-store dining. So we started to do curbside. They made some modifications to their operations so they could maximize drive-through traffic. And they maintained store operations, but they cranked up their efficiency quotient at those kinds of stores as well. So it improved the performance of those stores once dine-in came back online. You could see that those stores had increased their profitability quotient as well. So it was a really well executed improvement, store performance, buoyed by top line, but really the management and some of our initiatives that we were working with the management team on to improve store performance kind of came together and made it a really attractive offers for go-to-market.
Well done. That sounds like a great outcome. So then you had to decide, the reorganization is going well. Do you reorganize this and give people equity in a new entity, or do you sell it in the bankruptcy, which you went ahead and sold it? So how was that decision made? Was there voting or from the different classes?
Jim, do you want to start out with, because I think we were pursuing one path, kind of with as a primary goal, but we ultimately pivoted. But yeah, go ahead.
I think ultimately the creditors felt like a sale, once we started receiving some bids, was going to produce the most value for them.
I see.
And so we continue to move down that path. With a reorg still on the side of possibly, going down there. The issue is not all parties were still in consensus. There was still some debate between the franchisors and the creditors and the company and other stakeholders as to what kind of sale could actually happen under the franchise agreements. And so there was a lot of time spent on trying to work through that and ultimately resulting in a mediation with the judge and not sitting over the case. And that mediation went on for a little while. And ultimately he was able to get, parties to come to an agreement and understand what was in the best interest of everybody.
Right.
And, that's what ultimately got us to the deal.
So in the sale, the investment bank was able to get $800 million. The debt was about $900 million. The first secured, I believe, got 90% out, and the second really didn't do that well. So to get approval for a deal like that, that was the second liens and the unsecured probably didn't feel as positive as the first lien. So, but still, they approved that to go forward. You had enough support to push to start that sale and to complete it and get that sale approved.
Yeah, I think there was a long negotiation with the unsecured creditor committee as well. that went on for months. And we
I
finally
see.
keep a lot of sharing information and how the different sides were looking at value and what was available. And ultimately, once we got a sale that we were getting close to, we were able to come to an agreement with them. And I think that happened in early January of 21, which was kind of the last hurdle that we had to get over.
Right.
Yeah, and just to go back a little bit, I think there was a desire by some of the ad hoc bondholder group. They were, engaged in discussions with both the brands to see if there might be a meeting of the minds that could allow them to become owners. And ultimately there were certain demands that were going to be made by the brands. There were certain demands that that the bondholders had, in seeing themselves as central to to supporting the brands, given the scale of our business relative to the overall U.S. population. But when we started receiving offers that were high value and very solid, I think to Jim's point, they saw that not only as potentially the highest recovery, but certainly the fastest path to recovery, and it made for a compelling case to go ahead and sell the business. But there were still, like as you said, there were still substantive negotiations to help move that process forward, and there was still the overlay of the brands to consent to a sale of any other party. So it wasn't like just anyone could walk in the door and make an offer to own the business or buy the Pizza Hut business or the Wendy's business or the entire business. They still were going to be subject to evaluation and consent by the brands, and that's where the mediation that we came to was really instrumental in helping get everybody on the same page and seeing a path to completing the sale.
Okay. So then the Flynn Restaurant Group purchased most of the assets, and 6 regional buyers purchased Wendy's, if I'm not mistaken. So that was an interesting deal. Talk about the project management office that you set up to make that sale, all the due diligence happen, because those were 6 simultaneous 363 sale transactions happening at the same time. Very impressive.
Thank you. That was a hurdle I frankly didn't believe we would be able to pull off. Or that was an accomplishment I didn't think we could achieve. Just leading up to that, even the project management office, and Jim was the head of it, so I'll let him speak to it.
I see. Well,
but not only did that project management office have to get these to close, but the diligence process we had when we had 40 different interested parties was just a deluge of requests that we had to manage, getting appropriate diligence back to appropriate parties. But Jim, tell me about how that went, because that was remarkable.
Yeah, I was a part of the PMO team. We had a pretty large team that helped through the process. It was very difficult. We had 6 different pretty sophisticated buyers asking for a lot of diligence, a lot of meetings. We were competing with company management's time, trying to get scheduled time. There was a lot of follow-up and back and forth, and ultimately rolling into further negotiations on a lot of things that wanted adjustment to prices, that wanted to relook at different things. And so it was a lot of work for our team, but the company did a great job as well. They after having gone through the 300 store closures, had to go right back into this, and they were doing their day jobs as well. And so they did a fantastic job of keeping everybody happy and ultimately getting to the finish line.
No, great. That's what makes a deal like this work. It seems like that's where the rubber hits the road. So well done.
Yeah, there was daily coordination calls, daily, weekly coordination, daily coordination, down to hourly coordination. And Jim brings up probably the most important aspect here, which is I'm happy that we can speak today, and I'm glad Jim could join us, and the Weil and Green Hill teams. We all work together really well. But there were 20 team members on our side. There are probably 8 to 10 team members on the Weil side, similar number on Green Hill side, that all came together. And so they're the ones who collectively deserve the real credit here, because we were helping direct traffic, but there was a lot of hard work, a lot of late nights.
No, duly noted. It takes a big team to pull a deal like this off. And then there were 3 smaller settlements that you helped coordinate before the case was dismissed. McLean, Unsecured Creditors Committee, and a class of drivers. Was that really key to the deal, or
Yeah, absolutely, it was key to the deal because these were to some degree distractions that we had, but they were relevant. They were important to having these be settled in order for this to move forward effectively.
With some of the bids maybe contingent on resolving those or not?
I think basically what we were worried about is that the restructuring plan, that these parties could object to the restructuring plan, and that there could be, we wanted a consensual plan. We had obviously different aspects of it that were central to us believing that this would be successful, and having these, what I'll call distractions, off the table was really important. But these did not come together easily. Jim can speak to the driver's litigation claim that was I don't know, just a long-standing claim. But then we also had the with McLean, which was a primary supplier to the Pizza Hut business. They weren't, they were at times challenging to work with. We had differences of opinion of what our contract terms were and what they were obligated to do, and what we had within our rights as far as taking payment terms, trying to generate working capital when we were really desperate for it. We were able to get a successful resolution. I think that was satisfactory there, but some of these others were more complex litigation matters. But Jim, do you want to speak to those at all?
Yeah, so of the drivers, we had another situation where there's a long negotiation going on. There was a lot of, I would say, diligence, but there was a lot of work done in conjunction with the law firm that had brought the suit and on behalf of the drivers, a class action. And ultimately, the company and the buyers and the creditors all agreed it's in the best interest to get a class action settled and just put this behind everybody. And so that's ultimately what we worked for, to make sure that there was a clean slate.
Okay.
Again, resulted in a couple of days mediation.
Yep.
And we went through that process again, but ultimately, able to get to a final settlement that resolved all the issues.
Yeah, no, that's important. We often see a case like this that is not deleveraged or is not taking care of all the small things when you have the chance in a Chapter 11, and then it comes back into some process years later. Mm-hmm. So well done for that. So the last question I have is really, are there any pivotal moments that you can remember where anyone on the team really caused the negotiation to change or to pivot, or that made a big difference in the case that you will remember? Any highlights like that?
Yeah, we had a team member when we were going through the UCC negotiations and trying to understand where value was, who had a pretty big revelation as to how value would flow through the organization. That ultimately became kind of the linchpin of getting to a deal and how we got there. And we talk about a revelation. This was 11 o'clock at night, all suddenly, like a light bulb went off. Just all suddenly, it changed the course of that part of the case. And ultimately got us to a deal.
Yeah, okay. Really interesting. Anything from you, Charlie?
And I'd say the one of the best points was, I think working with the investment bank and our management team as well, was getting the buyer, the Flynn Restaurant Group, to finally agree to a number of things that were holding up this deal. And it really kind of came to a test of wills as to whether or not they're going to go through with this. And we, had to insist on some terms. We were negotiating in good faith with them, but at some point, we had to say, if this isn't going to come together, we're going to have to pursue a different path. And we finally were able to get them to agree to the terms that we thought were critical to us getting consent. So
those are important moments when you have to draw that line in the sand.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's not a winner or loser thing. It was just critical and pivotal that we got to that that consensus with them. So.
Well, congratulations on a great outcome, NPC International.
Thank you very much.
Everyone. Thank you, Jim, for joining us. Charlie, thank you so much. And our thanks to the whole team for submitting this great case. Please extend our congratulations, and we'll see you at the awards.
We appreciate the consideration, and thank you. Thank you very much. This was
thank you very much.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.